The information provided on lifeinterruptedradio.com is for educational purposes only.
Welcome, everyone, to the Autoimmune Hour, Surviving to Thriving. And oh my goodness, I'm so excited to be with you here for another episode. And I've got an amazing, interesting take. I had dear Swami, you guys probably remember him. He's been on our show a couple of times, Swami Tirtha. And he introduced me to Adam Markel, who is a master at integrating business mastery and self-discovery to create accelerated business results. And Adam and I were chatting, and he does this amazing thing about how to really restart after something's happened. And I said, wow, what could happen but an autoimmune diagnosis that makes you have to figure out how am I going to restart, re-energize my life? So welcome, Adam. Thanks for being on the show.
Oh my goodness. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me as a guest.
Oh my gosh, we were chatting beforehand, everyone, about our mutual friend and how wonderful it is to have community that introduces like-minded people. So, Adam, tell us a little bit about yourself and how did you get into this idea of reinvention?
Wow. Well, I'm sort of a recovering attorney. That's the way I describe myself these days. And in truth, I'm recovered. So it's been 10 years since my leaving the practice of law and having spent 18 years doing that work, much of the time not loving it. And I could use other descriptions for not loving it. That's sort of the polite way of saying it. But I was pretty miserable. And I think there's, at least this as would be suggested by Harris polls today, I'm not alone in that there are 55 or so % of the people who are in a job are actively looking for other work. More than 80% of folks that are in a career are not in their dream career. It's not where they feel that their true calling is necessarily. And I was in that situation, but ill-equipped to deal with it at the time. I just didn't know I had any options. My joy and I was really blessed to be married to my college sweetheart at the time, and now I think, well, let's see, it's 4 days from now, from the time that we're taping this, 4 days from now we'll be married 29 years. So that's
congratulations. Yep. What an achievement.
and we have 4 adult children, healthy kids, and so that's also amazing. I mean, as a parent, the most important thing is that you don't damage them too much. That's what I look at it. Go, yeah, we didn't damage them. These 4 kids, they're okay. They're healthy, emotionally and otherwise, physically too. So I had a lot to be grateful for, and I was blessed, and yet I was miserable. And I think that's what happens when we spend so much of our waking time doing things that our heart isn't in it. And so for me, I had success by every measurement, sort of, from a societal standpoint. I had a lot of money and prestige and that kind of success, but I was unhappy. So I really figured out along the way, through a lot of pain and a lot of suffering, which was only exacerbated by my reading about my plight. So I started reading books about what I was going through. And then I really recognized how deep a hole I was in at the time. And I realized that success without fulfillment feels like failure. And I felt like a failure. And my body was changing. I found myself needing caffeine in the afternoon just to stay awake. I was having trouble sleeping at night. I was taking Ambien to get to sleep. I was waking up with anxiety in the morning and feeling that anxiousness, and easy to anger. I mean, the kinds of symptoms that you can't ignore. You really can't ignore those things. And I did for so many years. And so in any event, I reinvented myself because I couldn't stand the pain. And I ultimately started to teach other people about what I had done and was in the process of still doing. And I wrote a book called Pivot, The Art and Science of Reinventing Your Career and Life. And it became a very big bestseller internationally, which enabled me to speak on stages and things all over the world about that topic of personal and professional reinvention. And so that's been a joy for me. It's led me to the point where I'm here with you speaking right now. And I've been able to spend a lot of time with people for many, many years on that topic. And I'll say this too, my dad, both my mother-in-law and my father have had autoimmune related challenges that really were debilitating at various points in their life. So my father started out where the initial diagnosis was was a runaway case of mononucleosis, and then it was Epstein-Barr, and then it was, and other things that weren't being properly diagnosed, and certainly they weren't calling it, putting it under that framework of autoimmune. And my mother-in-law, same thing. She had dermatomyositis that was called Epstein-Barr, and before that it was something else. And so I have a particular sensitivity and a compassion for that being a challenge physically and more than just physically in people's lives. And pivoting, the work that we teach, it is really related to much more than just your career. It has a lot to do with your mental outlook, with your health, relationships, etc.
Oh, absolutely. There's so much research out there right now that's past traumas, past stressors, the current stress you're under, all exacerbate. They'll say it doesn't cause autoimmune, but it certainly opens the door for other things like pathogens like Epstein-Barr to absolutely integrate into the to the physical symptom and create havoc. It's fascinating. I too, my diagnosis is dermatomyositis, and it's very rare. So isn't that fascinating to find another person with dermatomyositis? That's my I'll say the diagnosis, the word they put on it, but I refuse to accept it as a label, because that way, if you label yourself, and we'll talk about this, is how you label yourself is how you show up.
I agree with that. I think that language is so important. So
it absolutely is. So let's talk a little bit about this idea of pivoting, though. When we get a diagnosis, first we go into shock, a little bit of grief, some denial, all sorts of things, which is similar to any sort of thing, whether you're fired from a job or going through a breakup or any sort of thing. What are your first steps when someone's in that moment or just trying to figure their way out of that moment to begin the pivot process?
I say this and I'll smile and chuckle, and we can all chuckle at this, but it's also true. We have to breathe.
You know what is so interesting? A number of the guests, and I am a huge fan of breathing too, which I know sounds weird, but conscious breathing is so critical and so overlooked. And I had a client one time who years ago I told her, just breathe, you'll be fine. And I think it was 12 years later, she came to me and she, when you told me that, I was so angry with you, but it was the best advice I'd ever gotten.
Yeah. Well, there's sort of three steps in this, in the process of dealing with a pivot when it comes sort of unexpectedly. The book I wrote, The Art and Science of Reinvention, is very much a book about designing a new outcome in the future. So that book is also divided up into three pieces. The first is getting clear. There's very little we can do without clarity. So clarity is very connected to our behaviors. The second piece is about momentum. That's the baby steps and the things that we do in our life to change things. And that has a lot to do with behaviors. And many people have limiting beliefs and have limiting behaviors, which is why their lives can feel stuck at times. And the third piece is about taking action, putting it into a plan so that you've got a bit of a roadmap for the future. The part that we're talking about, that's more the design phase of pivoting. The default phase of pivoting is where we get that unexpected diagnosis, or someone dies, we didn't see that coming, or our job ends or something like that. We're really caught off guard. And in that case, there's three other things that I typically will talk about. One is to embrace. The second is to embody. And the third is to execute. And so I think to go back to that moment in time when you're caught off guard, which is what you asked me about. Yes, to breathe. To breathe is key, because breathing isn't just what we do naturally. I mean, to stay alive, it is that, but it's not just that. It's also our connection, to me, to our higher selves. It's our connection to our heart space. It's our connection to source. And I will say, for me, it's my connection to spirit. It's my connection to God. So to consciously breathe is very different than to breathe unconsciously. And we do that all the time. We're constantly breathing unconsciously. It's just how we're built. It's our habit to breathe, right? And I think there's a great distinction between habits, therefore, and and things that you do more consciously, which I would call rituals. So in that moment, to take some deep breaths, to be grounded, to be present with yourself, to know in that moment something that's true for you. So for example, there was a moment in time when I was very invested in a business, very invested in my role as both a co-owner as well as a founder and a CEO of a business. And my partners who had more shares in the company, were in control, so to speak, were in control, came to me one time and said, we are not happy with the direction of this company. We don't see eye to eye with you. We don't believe in your vision. Basically, you're gone. A couple of months of figuring it all out, how to exit, but basically getting the boot. And I remember in that moment where I realized it was happening, I could see it. It was just in slow motion, almost like I've not gotten a diagnosis like that, but I've been around people who have as well. And I imagine it's the same thing. The words are coming out of the doctor's mouth, or it's like in slow motion. Am I hearing what I'm hearing? Is this actually real, etc.? And so I did what I'm advising. I took those deep breaths. And what I realized came to me in that breathing is now a part of what I teach other people. And that is, I was hearing these words: embrace, embrace, embrace this thing that's happening, embrace the pivot. And very difficult in the moment when you don't know how it's all going to turn out, to embrace something that feels threatening, life-threatening, and threatening to your sense of security, like the loss of a job or the loss of your health and all of it, right? So that's a counterintuitive response. The more, I think, more prevalent reaction is that people, they become tense. They shallow. Their breathing becomes shallow. They get into fight or flight mode, or they freeze. That's more prevalent. So the first thing I would say is to breathe and realize you are well, you are okay. You are breathing. That's a good sign that you are still breathing, right? Yeah.
Absolutely. That's the critical sign there. And I'll notice that there's going to be a time where sometimes you'll notice yourself in fight, flight, or freeze, and then you start breathing, and that's okay too. Oftentimes, until you go through the process enough times to know that the automatic response is just breathe through it, it's okay. The recovery process is more important than if you've momentarily flipped into fear. It's just breathe your way back out of it.
Yeah, and the cortisol, the things that how your body responds or deals with stress has an impact on the decisions you're going to make in that moment. I mean, people can make some pretty poor decisions in the moment when they're under stress.
And especially when someone I call the white coat authority is telling you all sorts of really scary things. And since it's your life, it's a very different way that it's received when they go, you, and it's something disastrous, and another you, and another disaster. And it just keeps coming. And I think one of the things I learned after the diagnosis is don't make any quick decisions at that moment. You've got some time. You don't have to make a decision in that exact second.
Right. There are people who will make a decision, like you say, quickly, and then potentially see that they had other options, see that they may have even made a kind of compounded the situation, making a poor choice, and now it makes it worse. But if you knew 100% that you were okay, that it was all going to be fine, and not only was it all going to be fine, but that in the end, sometime in the future, it could be, a year, could be 30 years, it could be, 3 lifetimes in the future. I don't know what the future, where the limits on that extend to, but you knew for sure it was going to be just what was required, that everything that's happening in our lives is required. And that's a blessing. And if you knew that as a certainty in that moment, you would embrace it. You would say, maybe it's not exactly what I thought I wanted at this time, but clearly this is in my highest interest, and therefore I love it and I'll embrace it. And that's a completely different energy. It gives you access to a whole different set of tools and options. And in that moment, you want to be highly resourced when something happens like that. You want to be at your best, right? You want to have the access to as many resources as you can, starting with those that are innate to you and are divinely yours. And and look, I'm a lawyer, guys. This can sound a little wooey, even when I hear it. I go, oh, that's out there on some level, especially maybe your audience might be more receptive to this. But if I was speaking to a bunch of lawyers or my old New York City buddies or something, they might look at me kind of funny. And the truth is, this is real. This is real life. And real life is about, in so many ways, how it is that we are able to access our true self, our higher self, our own divineness in a moment when other people might be panicking, when the market might be crazy, when all kinds of things on the outside look chaotic. Change is something happening constantly. It's chronic. I mean, when we're talking about health stuff, chronic is a word that comes up. We're in the process right now of even writing a new book about how it is you create resilience in the face of chronic change. And this is one of the ways you do it.
Oh, absolutely. And so many things came to my mind about when I was at the height of the diagnosis and a lot of the skin rashes and muscle weakness. I started the Autoimmune Hour, and people are looking at me like, what are you doing? Why are you taking on another challenge and all of this? But I embraced it, and actually it was one of the ways I could gather all the information I needed to know to make decisions. As in my other life, as Adam knows, I do communications training and body language work. And I was frustrated talking to medical professionals. I'm going, with my training, I am absolutely frustrated. What are people without this training going through and understanding the nuance of language? It's so important for me one of the things I discovered was, beyond embracing it, was charting that new future. For me, it was, okay, this is what I'm going to do, and I'm going to share what I'm learning with other people. And that's how the Autoimmune Hour came about, was embracing the diagnosis. Doesn't mean you're happy about it at the time.
Yes.
But that was really critical for me, was to get out there, learn everything I could, and then share what I was learning, because there was so much scary information out there, and it doesn't have to be scary.
When you start with embracing, it enables you to then recalibrate. It allows, because you're not in resistance. So when we're faced with the change, that sudden thing, our reaction is often to resist it. So you have this other choice, this other option, which is to accept it. That's another option. But there's a third option, and I call that acceptance plus. And acceptance plus is this embracing piece, which is that we're going to utilize it. It's not going to go to waste, and we have to recalibrate to do that. So it's now you're going to embody it. You're literally going to embody the fact that there's a new normal here, and the new normal is that recalibration of, yeah, I have something in my body that's working its way through, or that it will alter some of the things that I do. And I think there's nothing that we can always judge that as wrong or bad, but as soon as we do that, we're in resistance to what is, and you're working against the universe, as opposed to something that is more loving and kind and more true, which is that everything is happening there for us, for our benefit. So why should this be any different?
So a little off topic, Adam, but what happens if the resistance is from the people closest to you? Like, they want to, I know this will sound crazy, but super take care of you. Like, oh, don't stand up, don't, or the opposite, like they just go into the grief mode for you. How do you suggest people sort of help other people to see, I'm okay?
Yeah, that's such a great question. We are always affecting people in so many ways. And I once heard somebody say that you either you're always affecting or infecting people. And that's pretty extreme, but you can see how that's the case, but sometimes, but yeah, the people around you are going to be triggered in some way, and their fear, it's often what gets triggered in them is their own vulnerability and fear. So here's how they, respond, is they do for you and do for you like all of a sudden you can't do anything for yourself, or somehow or another they've, like you say, predicted the worst future, and that's their own fear, et cetera. So I think the best that we can do in those situations is model in our own behavior how it is that we wish to be taken care of or treated, and set healthy boundaries, as my wife would say. So we just be, loving in the way that we let people know how we want to be cared for. So to say, I so appreciate that you want to help me and take care of me. In fact, I really want you to do that. And there are times when I would prefer that not be the case. And if it's okay with you, I'd love to let you know when those times are. I prefer that you not do that. And certainly if what you want to do is talk to me about all the ways that this thing could go sideways, and that you're already kind of planning my funeral or whatever it is, I'm going to let you know, while I know you're coming from a place of love, and you're even mourning, somehow grieving with me for this thing that you think is happening. That's not where I'm coming from. And that energy isn't really what I want to. I don't want to be infected by that. What I want is to be affected by your love for me. So can we find a way for you to express your love that feels healthier, and that actually is more more of what would work to help me, as opposed to making me feel like I don't want to spend time with you.
Oh, that's beautiful. I can't wait for the transcript, guys, because I'm going to read that several times, Adam. Thank you. That was really lovely. Now, your next book is on resilience. And what are some tips that you have for building resilience? Because I'll tell you, sometimes, especially in the early phases of going into thriving and staying in thriving, sometimes it feels like one step forward, two steps back.
Oh my goodness, isn't that true? Well, I would say that the creation of your rituals is one of the areas that I think are very powerful in the area in what it takes to create resilience. So there was a Harvard Business Review article some months ago that talked about how professional athletes recover from stress. And they compared that recovery process to those of the corporate athletes. So they were the athletic folks and the folks that are in business, whether they're in job and they're executives or they're entrepreneurs. And sports folks, they play a game, they play it very hard for a few hours at a time, and then they take a break. And sometimes they have months between their seasons. In business today, you're on all the time. I mean, people have very few boundaries. It's almost like a 7-day-a-week, 24-hour thing, where it can feel that way, so that the level of stress is even greater, I think, in that arena. But what they found was that the highest performing athletes had rituals for recovery. And these were mental, emotional, spiritual, and physical rituals. And this was looking at them, sort of top to bottom, and what they did to recover quickly. And this, as I said, was a Harvard Business Review article. And I found that so fascinating, because to be resilient, so we use the word resilience, I don't think there's a more important skill or tool that you could either learn, adopt, or enhance in yourself than the skill of resilience today. Because change is constant. It's chronic. Disruption is everywhere. And so therefore stress, our response to change, which is automatically, sort of seeing it or feeling it as threatening, is stress. So to be able to recover from that is important. And we've created rituals that help for that resilience, to that recovery process that produces resilience. So for example, how you wake up in the morning, what do you do in the first few minutes of waking? What sort of a ritual have you adopted? So we have a 3-step waking process. It's going to sound super simplistic. And at the same time, it's profound in its simplicity, I think, because I've taught it for years all over the world. It's changed my life, certainly, and the lives of so many other people that I get to hear from, whether it's parents who've taught it to their kids, or it's older people that are dealing with their aging process, or it's millennials that are just caught in this sort of never an off moment, with social media and everything else. They're on all the time. So it's 3 steps. The first step is to wake up. And that sounds funny, and we could all wink about that, but there's no guarantee that we're going to wake up tomorrow. So the fact is that when we do wake up, it is a blessing. In fact, there was no guarantee we'd wake up today. And those who are listening, watching this right now, and you and I certainly, that was a gift. It was a blessing. So waking up is key. Waking up on a conscious level as well as physically. And in that waking moment, I suggest that people also sit in gratitude for even a few seconds to realize as they take that first conscious breath, there are people taking their last breath at that very moment. So regardless of the health challenges you might have, or business challenges or relationship challenges, we all have them. I mean, all of us do. We can be grateful to start. And that's the first seeds that you're planting for the day. So it's waking, being grateful. And then there's a statement that I say out loud, and I invite people who are taking this in right now to consider saying these words out loud. I love my life. I love my life. I love my life. It's a mantra. It's a declaration. It's an intention. It's a calling forth what is true at the deepest level for us, that we are on a journey of self discovery, of self love, of coming back to returning to our factory settings, that unconditional love is how we were born, and unconditional acceptance is what's really true. And so all that false stuff, all that fake news, if you will, as we grow up thinking that somehow that we're not deserving or worthy of love unconditionally, or acceptance for whatever reasons or whatever experiences we've had, that to return to those factory settings is so key in creating a stronger, the more resilient person that we are capable of being. Because in business and in life, if we don't get to the next day, if we don't get to apply the wisdom from what we've learned, then what would it have been for in the first place? So resilience is the key, and that one waking ritual, I think, is a great place to begin. So wake up, be grateful, and if you feel like saying it, declare it out loud. I love my life.
Oh, I love my life. Thank you. Thank you. And I put a little Post-it notes around on things like on mirrors or other places where I'll see little things, put little inspirational things throughout the day, which helps just keep me coming back and focusing on the gratitude part. Because, as the day goes on, sometimes you can get so wound up in answering phones or doing other things that it takes some time to recenter yourself, reground yourself. At least I know I have to do that. Sometimes I get sort of carried away and I have to come back to center. So I love that. Thank you. And I have to be honest, there were times at the beginning of the diagnosis where when I did my gratitude journal, sometimes it was just putting my feet on the floor. It's like, okay, I'm just grateful that I'm awake and able to sit up and put my feet on the floor. But that still created profound change. And that's what I love, that these don't have to be big, earth-shattering moments that you're grateful for. They are whatever it is happening for you in the moment. That's just so lovely. I appreciate that. What are some other things that you found about resilience? The study of resilience fascinates me, because you can see some people who, with a diagnosis or other things happening, fall into what I call professional victimhood. Where others are like, wow, how do they keep going? That's shocking. That's amazing. So after we've done the morning ritual, and I love the term ritual. It's such an intense word. What are some other things that you have found that people do to continue to create success throughout their day?
Thank you. This is a part of the Pivot book that I really am very, there's things in it I absolutely adore and love and have really worked well. And there are other things that I might do differently. I mean, it's gotten such great feedback. I try not to be too critical, but that's the way anybody is, right? You look at your work and you go, oh, this is what's 80% of things that are amazing. And then you look at the 20% that you would do differently. But I loved our treatment of that subject, resilience, in the book, where I describe 3 ways of approaching a setback. Because I think that when we talk about a health issue of some kind or a diagnosis, it feels like a setback, because
Yes, a profound setback.
A profound setback in some case, right? So there's a process that we would use. And the first of these 3 steps, I think, is really important. And that is that we frame it up. We frame up or frame it in a way that's powerful. So you look at the situation that you're in after taking that deep breath, after being able to hopefully embrace it. You can say, so how is it that this might actually serve me? How is it that this is actually a creative opportunity in my life? Maybe the health diagnosis at a minimum is it's a call to slow down. It's a call to change. Like I've got an amazing woman by the name of Elizabeth Yarnell who teaches on the topic of autoimmune challenges, and I'm going to make an introduction to you. I think she'd be a wonderful person for you to meet. And I remember she was saying, well, look, and she was diagnosed with MS when she was in her late 20s. She says her diet was so awful. So she's working, sort of 80 hours a week, and she's surviving on those candy goldfish. What are those called? Oh my gosh, why am I drawing a blank on that? But like on sugar candies and sweets and things like that. Oh, Swedish fish, right? So she's eating Swedish fish, right, to keep herself going. So it could be that the diagnosis is a call to slow down or change something, so that something doesn't, happen down the line that might really take you out or change things in a way that's even more profound. So framing up is the first key. The second one is to mine, dig for the wisdom. My grandmother used to call those little gems. What are the little distinctions or the little things that you have learned as a result of this thing that's happening right now? So what is the wisdom that you've gained or can anticipate that you will gain? That's the second step. And the third step is self-care. And that's where those rituals for recovery and those rituals for resilience really come in, that we've got to take care of ourselves better, even better than we've been taking care of ourselves, whether that means to adopt a practice for meditation or do yoga or just change your diet in some way or go away and clear some space to recover, etc. But that you will really commit at a high level to self-care, which I think women have more problems with this than men, and in particular women who are also mothers too, because women, I think, have been programmed to be more selfless, to have more people that they are taking care of than focusing their attention on caring for themselves. So these three things, this framing up, finding the wisdom, and then really committing, not just lip service to it, but that you actually commit to self-care, would be one of those, that's an area that we want to share with more people, that's the process of creating resilience.
Awesome. And you're so right about these little markers that happen. When I reflected back with my functional medicine practitioner, which I love the concept of functional medicine, where they go back through your history instead of just dealing with, oh, you have sniffles today. Why are we here? Because when I went through my history, there were markers that were precursors to autoimmune way before the actual diagnosis. Not knowing. And I also thought that I ate healthy, but now I realize that just having a salad for lunch is not eating healthy. So and nothing like an autoimmune diagnosis to get you to commit to the process as well. Because when you're feeling okay, you're not great, you're like, okay, I'll just keep moving. You can commit to it for the short term, but then it's so easy to cheat when somebody comes along and says, hey, you want to go out tonight, or you want to do this, or you want to do that, or it's just a piece of cake.
And this is the thing that I think is really cool too, is how it is that what's happening ultimately ends up being how you serve the world, that your situation, your suffering or pain even becomes your credential in some ways to help other people. So for example, with my friend Elizabeth Yarnell, she became a a massively successful cookbook author of recipes that she created for herself to heal herself, to, Louise Hay's, heal your life, right? So she created these cookbooks and has an incredible business around that, and has had tremendous success, which would not have existed but for the fact that she walks into a doctor's office who, sits her down and tells her she has MS at like 28 years old. So you go, that's awful. Who would ever want to have that happen? Sit down and have that be told to them. And a lot of your listeners, your viewers are probably thinking the same thing. I've had this said to me and that to me. I never would want that or wish it on anybody. And yet how you utilize it, how you create alchemy around it, in essence, right? Turning lead to gold is really a part of the mystery and the elegance of life. It's beautiful.
Oh, and that's what we call thrivers here, the ones who have taken it and found something unique. And sometimes when you first start, it could just be, I've talked to friends about this before, who said, well, people say, do you want your old life back? And it was a resounding no. They were all like, no. When I think about it, there are certain things I still maybe wish I could do, but do I want my old life back? No. And what was fascinating, I'd say probably 80% of us all said, we're nicer people after all of this happened. We've slowed down, we've stopped, we've looked around, we've taken into consideration a lot more things than we were considering before the diagnosis, which I find such a fascinating. That's one of the little gems that your grandma would have mentioned. And people are like going, oh, that's such a strange thing to say, but it's really true that I think a diagnosis or any life crisis really, it changes the way you view the world forever. There really is no going back. If someone even had a magic wand, there really is no going back.
No. Now, I know that we've only got a couple of minutes here, but if it's possible, I would love to just take a second and share a gift with your audience, if it's okay.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
We have an amazing community. It's a Facebook group called Start My Pivot, and folks can go to startmypivot.com to get, before deciding whether they want to even join the community on Facebook, because some people don't dig that anyway, which is totally cool. There's not having to join the community before that. On that page, startmypivot.com, there's 6 questions that we call our Kickstart guide. And it's totally free. There's nothing being sold. It's just a guide that we created for people who are pivoting, whether it's in health or other areas. And these are 6 really powerful questions that if they'll print them and write out their answers, they will find some pretty interesting discoveries, self-discoveries, as well as some of the rituals that we have used. So, sort of morning, midday, and evening kind of rituals to create more resilience. So that's a gift. Startmypivot.com. If anybody would love to check that out, we're happy to have people do that.
Oh, that was so kind. Thank you, Adam, for offering it. What a great gift. I'll have that URL up on understandingautoimmune.com for everyone to be sure and get that. Thank you so much, because everything you've shared today is just great gems for being able to get through, I'll say, not just the physical, but get through that mental part that sometimes trips us up more than the physical part. So
yes.
Tonight, Adam, thank you so much. I just want to reintroduce you to everyone. We've been hearing from Adam, who is the CEO of More Love Media, as well as an author and a business expert who teaches professionals, entrepreneurs, and leaders how to transform their life. His best-selling book is called Pivot, The Art and Science of Reinventing Your Career and Life. And you can also find more about Adam at adammarkel.com, and we'll have that URL as well up on our website, understandingautoimmune.com. Thank you so much, Adam, for being our guest tonight. It was really awesome to hear all about this, because, like I said, how you do one thing is how you do everything in your life.
Thank you so much. What a blessing. And I appreciate the opportunity to chat with you. This was a wonderful conversation.
Absolutely. I'm just energized now.